All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? We're currently in the year 2024. Everything's going great. The world is all well and just everything. But you know
Oh
what?
yeah.
Sometimes I think I want to go back to the early 2010s when I think we could all argue that metal was the best. It was the heaviest. It was the most cavalt. It was the most brutal. I think we can all agree on that. Right, Brian?
Not just metal, but music in general. 2012, 2013, great eras. Certainly was Cavolt.
Certainly was. I could think of everything from like Black Eyed Peas to Pitbull, just the real most hardcore, just heavy fucking music.
Witch House was burning up the club charts.
God, remember the Chainsmokers? Oh my God, these guys are so fucking heavy, dude.
They did that cool song with Coldplay. Is that the Chainsmokers?
I think so. I don't know. For whatever reason, they're still a big band for whatever reason, but they should have been a one-hit wonder. But either way,
I thought they were. I was sure that they were gone.
no, they are still very popular, Brian. They are actually a pretty popular EDM band, which is crazy to me. But speaking of things that don't suck shit and are a lot less heavy than Black Eyed Peas, this week I want to review Suicide Silence's album, The Black Crown. But before we get into our review this week, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Cringe Millennial Moment of the Week.
Week.
Woo! Yeah! All right. And, for our cringe generational millennial moment of this week, I was originally going to choose something from the deathcore era because Suicide Silence are arguably the first deathcore band, inarguably the first popular deathcore band, inarguably. There's so much incredible cringe content regarding like mid-2000s deathcore. But you know what, Brian? A historic cringe millennial moment happened this week. And we're recording this on July 18th. This is the last day of the RNC here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's gone very well. Nothing's happened that is soured
No
the entire event.
tragedies.
No tragedies at all. But the cringe millennial I want to talk about this week is one that we are unfortunately almost certainly going to have to talk about for a long time. So this is part one. We're going to talk about fucking JD Vance. He is a very cringe millennial because, Brian, he was born in 1984. And I think we can argue he's very cringe. Very, very fucking cringe.
I think he looks kind of cool. He's got that cool beard. He's got the cool style.
He looks like Haley Joel Osment if he had an extra chromosome. That's what he looks like.
I mean, I thought that was Will Menaker.
Yeah. He looks like Haley Joel Almond eyes. Okay, that's bad. I'm not. But yeah, so I'm not going to get too much into JD Vance because unfortunately we're almost certainly going to have to talk about him. But just as a preface, he is the VP nominee for Donald Trump, who's almost certainly going to win this election at this current moment, unfortunately. But we're going to release this episode in a few months, so maybe that'll change. And I really hope to fucking God that changes.
Would that be fucking nice?
But Brian, it would be interesting that the second most powerful person in the country is a elderly millennial. That would at least be interesting. I will say that.
I've never properly looked at Vance's face before this week. He does look so much like a millennial. It's a fucking drag, man.
He looks like one of those epic beer millennials.
Yeah. He's like a Buffalo Wild Wings guy.
He looks like one of those guys who's like, me and my girl are in a poly relationship. We're going to be epic about it.
Yeah, her tit/brown/paint area still pones my dick and balls or whatever.
Me and the wife had some sexy times, and it was epic. That's what he looks like.
I squeezed under boobs.
Oh, God. So, yeah, I'm going to leave
but
that.
She better not enjoy it.
Oh, God. And even on top of it, too, his wife is apparently like an upper caste, like Indian Brahmin type, and that's even bizarre. For the type of guy that JD Vance is, it's very strange.
So I don't mean to be like a douchebag. Not bad.
Yeah, for JD Vance, he certainly deserves worse. I will say that.
Shit.
Oh, God. But you know what? We will definitely save some JD Vance cringe for later. But I certainly wanted to have him. It's almost certainly going to be part one. There will almost certainly be a part two JD Vance cringe because he is a very cringy elderly millennial and inarguably going to be the most powerful cringe millennial pretty soon, if we're going to be honest with you.
And we're going to, because we don't actually have that much JD Vance content as of now. I think a lot of people have for a while known who he is and known kind of his politics, but we're going to get a lot of actual insight, I think, into him in the coming months and years.
Yeah, honestly, maybe if, God forbid, if Trump wins, maybe we should review Hillbilly Elegy. because that is
That
his biopic.
yeah, that is a good idea. I've never watched it. I remember it was weird when it came out because even a lot of like kind of left liberals were like, "This looks pretty good. It looks thoughtful," and I was like, "Really?"
It's like, yeah, a movie about how like poor Appalachians should just like starve to death. That's yeah.
About how happy he is that he abandoned his poverty-stricken family.
Well, speaking of guys who didn't do that, I think that leads perfectly into our review here. So this is The Black Crown. This is Suicide Silence's third studio album. It came out in 2011. And the reason I wanted to review this is because, and we're going to do this as a series, but we're going to talk about nu metal revival and nu metalcore. And inarguably, this is either the very first or one of the first nu metal revival albums. This is a very important album in regards to modern metal. It's super influential and super important.
Well, one of my thoughts listening to it, so just for a little bit of full disclosure here, up until this week, my only exposure to Suicide Silence was in the late 2000s or very, very early 2010s. It was when I was in high school. Some kid showed them to me because I said I liked grindcore. And he was like, I like grindcore too, like Suicide Silence. This was probably, I guess, their first album. And I hated it so much. And I hated this kid for calling them grindcore so much. And I never thought about them again after that. But listening to this, it is really interesting because it's nu metal as a moment was still fresh and still kind of dunked on. So for them to come out with this album that is so on its face indebted to it is pretty interesting. Pretty ballsy move.
Oh, yeah. So this album came out in 2011. It came out in June 2011. And I could tell you, as somebody who was a nu metal fan in the late 2000s, early 2010s, nu metal was very dunked on, especially at this point. Like, nobody outside of the biggest fucking nerds and like elderly millennial guys who just couldn't get over their high school years thought nu metal was good. And then these guys, Suicide Silence, who were all very indebted to nu metal. Chris Garza talks about it all the time on his podcast. And I would not recommend the Chris Garza podcast. It is a very boring unlike our podcast. It is a very boring podcast. No hatred to Chris Garza. He seems like a perfectly nice guy, but I just legitimately don't understand why he makes a podcast. He has so little charisma. I just don't understand. It's baffling to me. Like, okay, yes, he is a big name in modern metal, very influential. He's
guess
the only consistent member in this band that is very well loved in like deathcore and nu metal, but still, I just don't understand it.
It's so funny too, because Taylor, the first person to ever expose me to deathcore, and again, at the time I hated it, was you in probably 2012. And I remember the way you described it, I think you showed me a mirror and you said, oh, it's like nu metal kids like trying to play death metal. And I thought, that's insane. There's no way that's a genre that exists. Listening to this album now, because like I'm not that I'm the biggest metalhead, but I was at that time I liked prog metal and I liked really extreme metal and whatever. And so I'm thinking of like death metal bands like Deicide and whatever. And I'm thinking there's no way that there's a nu metal death metal hybrid genre. And listening to this again this week, I'm going, oh, this actually is 100% that. This is somehow perfectly marrying the playing styles and the composition styles of these two pretty far afield genres.
It is very interesting in that way. I mean, I like nu metal more than deathcore, but deathcore to me is also like a very well-loved metal genre for me. It is very, I mentioned cringe. Maybe one day if we ever review another deathcore album, I will certainly talk about the deathcore cringe because deathcore cringe is prime metal cringe. It is hilariously cringe. Like, imagine like the earnestness and like just the trying way too hard to be hard, like metal, but combined with like wigger aesthetics.
When you say it like that because my aesthetics a little bit, wiggery at times. So when you say it like that, I'm like, damn, yeah, let's get to it. Let's fucking kill it. In fact, I don't know hardly anything about deathcore, but just as a personality, probably the most charismatic seeming guy in the scene is that fucking weirdo from a mirror.
Yeah, Frankie Palmieri, most definitely.
Palmieri.
I'm going to say rest in peace, Mitch Lucker, but definitely Mitch Lucker was another big guy in that scene. Austin Carlisle was too, but the less we talk about Austin Carlisle, the better. Alex the Terrible, once again, the less we talk about Alex the Terrible, the better. But he's problematic for a different reason than Austin Carlisle is problematic for a different reason. I'll just say that I was going to say, I don't know which side Alex the Terrible takes in Ukraine-Russia conflict, but either way, it's a bad side. It's the bad side. No matter which one it is, it's the bad side.
Would you argue, just based on what I've read about the genre, would you say that deathcore is one of the real last gasps of like edgy boy aesthetic towards the mainstream?
That too, and I think this was also probably the last death rattle of like popular metal, I would
Oh
say.
yeah, metal as like a genre moving within the posphere with its own kind of subgroup and things. What I remember about deathcore, other than you, is that I mostly saw like kind of like scene kids rapping it. Not that this
Yep.
is like the same type of music, but there was some overlap there, I think, in the kind of the humor and the sensibility and the edginess, and then also just I think in the obnoxiousness. This
Yes,
is not an obnoxious album. I'm not saying that, but just in general.
I would say the scene slash deathcore, like if it was a Venn diagram, it would be pretty close to a full circle. There was a lot of overlap. Like if scene kids liked metal, which not all scene kids like metal, but if scene kids liked metal, it was almost certainly like deathcore and new metal almost exclusively.
I'm to the point now where I'm able to appreciate this album. But because I've also talked about how there's a type of post-hardcore and a type of metalcore from like the 2000s and 2010s that I'm not into. It's too far removed from like the type, what I like about hardcore. Listening to this now, I really hone in on the new metal elements, but I also think like, oh, if I'd heard this at the time, I would have really disliked it. As opposed to like, there's things I like in it and things I don't now. I kind of can take it as for what it is.
No, I totally agree. I totally fucking agree with that. And then speaking of, I'm gonna continue on with the details here. So this album does not have a parental advisory sticker, so I guess they did not opt into it.
You can't even understand anything he's saying, right? Right?
Exactly.
The Cookie Monster over here.
Yeah. He does do some Cookie Monster vocals on The Cleansing, but there is none of
A
that
little
on this
bit.
album. There is none of that on here. It was performed once again by the band Suicide Silence. The personnel includes Mitch Lucker on vocals. Once again, rest in peace. This was his last album before he died. Mark Hulman on lead guitar, Chris Garza, as I mentioned, on rhythm guitar, who is Suicide Silence's only consistent member, Dan Kelly on bass, and Alex Lopez on drums. And I believe Alex Lopez and Chris Garza are still in the band, but I don't think any of the others are, I think. Don't quote me on that. But I know Chris Garza has been on every single Suicide Silence release. In fact, this was Mitch and Chris's band. Because Chris Garza, it's kind of like with like Chris Novoselic always talking about Kurt Cobain. Chris is always
Oh,
talking about Mitch. But to be fair, they were like best
oh,
friends, so I get it. So
yeah. I mean, that's funny, but I don't want to be too mean about it because.
no, exactly, yeah. So this album was released on Century Media, as well as I believe their first three albums were released on Century Media, although I think they're on a different label now. And this album was produced by Steve Evans. Now, I was not familiar with specifically the name of Steve Evans, but Brian, holy shit, this guy has produced maybe every album we've ever liked. Straight up, this guy has produced so many albums. He produced fucking Fixation on a Coworker by Dead Guy. He produced albums
Ooh.
by MOD. He produced every Dillinger Escape Plan album. He produced Hatebreed albums. Like, this guy produced so much shit that we all love. He's produced some Earth Crisis records. He
Oh,
also
he's done, yeah, Dillinger Escape Plan. He's some shit. This is gonna be a very he really
Sepultura
just
too.
yeah, and some of the better pop punk bands like Saves the Day and the Wonder Years.
And The Cure. I was
Oh,
reading a
let's see
little
which
bit.
one.
It was the
I mean,
2004 album, just the self-titled
okay,
album.
that's fine.
Sick of it all. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
just
that's
like,
fine.
oh, well, of course,
MOD.
Brian's favorite band, Alisana, of course, as we all know, Brian's favorite band.
Oh, he's done Lifetime. Do you know Lifetime? You'd probably love them.
I'm not familiar with that band specifically.
It's like a hardcore band. There's a lot of that sort of 90s hardcore that I think you would really dig. Oh shit, yeah, and I see it. And he's done some Dillinger stuff. Yeah, that's cool.
And he was also in Frank Iero and the Patients. So,
He was in the band?
yeah, he was in the band, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, no, but he's produced like a lot of albums and from artists we all love. So I thought that was hilarious because I had never
Oh,
heard this guy before.
and actually, the Saves the Day record that he did is their album Sound the Alarm, which is, I don't do that much pop punk anymore. That's one of my favorite pop punk records ever because it's got this kind of grimy 70s punk feel.
Interesting. Yeah, shit. I'll have to, because I'm not the biggest pop punk guy myself, but if you love it, fuck, I'll probably love it.
I'm not going to listen to it in my 30s. It saves
Oh,
the
yeah.
day, but it's interesting.
Yeah, fair enough. And then this album is 39 minutes and 24 seconds long. And on Amazon, it has a 4.7 out of 5. And on Rate Your Music, it has a 2.6 out of 5, which I thought this album was more well-liked than I initially thought. But apparently, it's kind of middle of the road critically. I think the reason that people really remember this album is, well, this is also Mitch's, last album. And it's also got inarguably their most popular song. Like, it's not even close how much one of the songs this album is so much more played than all of their other songs. It's crazy. Like the stream numbers are like double this one song versus any of their other songs. And to be fair, it's because it's like it was like Mitch's and like the band's like statement. Like it was their mission statement. So it makes sense. But there's one song in this album that is like legitimately more popular than a lot of like actual like popular pop songs you might think. Like it is a crazy popular song. But we'll get to that when we get to that.
Okay, it's a secret.
Yeah, well, I'll save it. But I mean, we'll get to it very shortly, but I will save it. So, and then before we get to the track listing, I usually do the Amazon reviews before we get onto the track listing. So I'll continue that trend here. So I didn't find a whole lot of good reviews on Amazon. I found a couple good ones, but they're more of discussion points than actual funny reviews. So I thought they were good to choose from. They won't make you angry, Brian. They won't. Yeah. So Killer Babe gives this 5 stars. And the head of the review says, R.I.P. Mitch Lucker. And the body of the review says, this is one of the best CDs from Suicide Silence. I actually disagree. I think it's their weakest Mitch Lucker album, but that's not the here nor there, whatever. I got the CD in perfect condition and on time. For those of you looking to buy the CD, you should also get the Memorial Show CD/DVD. R.I.P. Mitch Lucker, you will be greatly missed but never forgotten. And when it thunders, I'll know it's just you stomping with the angels. So that was very cute.
Yeah, that's nice. Sure.
That was very fucking cute. But I wanted to include this review because I wanted to talk about the Memorial Show, because the Memorial Show is stacked. So this was recorded, I want to say, a month after he died. He died in November of 2012. He died in a motorcycle accident. And this was done as like a benefit concert for his daughter, because his daughter was very young. I want to say like 3 or 4 years old or something.
Okay.
And it was basically a bunch of big deathcore bands and metal bands at the time covered mostly Suicide Silence songs with like a new vocalist. And I want to include some of these. So they had Johnny Davey of Job for a Cowboy. They had Phil Bozeman of Whitechapel, and arguably another really big deathcore band, Whitechapel. Not one I'm a huge fan of, but, undeniably a very big Whitechapel.
Started out as more like a death metal band, right? Like a kind of straightforward death metal, is that right?
The first time I heard them, they were just straight up deathcore. Like they were with like the pig squeals and everything. Yeah, the bree vocals and all that.
I used to make seeing kids at my high school really mad by saying "blowjob for a cowboy" and then saying it was a Brokeback Mountain tribute band.
Hell yeah, dude. You also had Danny Worsnop of Asking Alexandria, Tim Lambesis. Once again, the less we say about Tim Lambesis, the better. They had Eddie Hermida, who later ended up being the vocalist of post-Mitch Suicide Silence, and inarguably way worse in every single way. Eddie Hermida sucks shit. He is terrible. He's so bad.
Because the vocals on this record, it's not my favorite type of like hard rock vocalist, far from it, but pretty good. Like he's got some range,
No, exactly, yeah. And Eddie Hermida does not. He does not. And then I mentioned Austin Carlisle once again, less the said the better. And Chad Gray of Mudvayne, Rob Flynn of Machine Head, Max Cavalera of Sepultura, and Randy Bly. So a lot of people were on this. Some really amazing names in modern metal. So it was good to see that they all came out to support Mitch here.
Interesting that a member of Mudvayne's included, because one of my thoughts listening to this is that I was getting some heavy LD50 vibes.
Oh, yes.
Throughout the album.
Yes, 100%. And once we get to the track listing, we will definitely talk about the new metal fucking influences here for fucking sure. And you know what? One more I want to talk about with this benefit show was Johnny Plague of Winds of Plague covered a song. And Brian, I don't think you've ever heard of Winds of Plague, have you?
No.
Oh my God, you would hate Winds of Plague. They are, and I'm not bullshitting, they are a symphonic operatic deathcore band.
No. No. The thing is, like, even like the best symphonic metal, most of it sucks. And I like prog, but
it is. It's rough. I'm gonna be honest. It's pretty rough. To me, it's very funny because it's just so aggressively 2000s, like especially late 2000s. But man, you would fucking hate that shit. Like
it's also just like those two things don't belong together.
No, they don't. They really don't. And there's the one song that's like their big song. The guy is dressed up like a rapper and he's rapping along too. It's so goofy.
I will, after we finish recording, I will look this up. And maybe I'll love it.
It is hilarious.
Their original name, get this, was Bleak December.
God, it's so middle school fucking notebook stuff. It's awesome.
Yeah, Winds of Plague. Jesus. Their first album was called Decimate the Weak. Sorry. Yeah, I will look this up.
I'll link the video after we're done recording the one I'm talking about. It is so funny. It is so funny. Maybe we'll cover that on a later deathcore recording. Holy shit.
No. Okay. Maybe.
Yeah. But then to our next review here. So Christopher Adamson gives us 5 stars. And the head of the review says, solid album. And the body of the review says, I listened to Time to Bleed. I listened to Time to Bleed? I think it's Time to Bleed, but whatever. I think he just did it wrong. And this album is better, in my honest opinion. Once again, it is not. But this is one of the rare few albums I can listen from front to back without switching songs. So I included that review because there was literally just one thing to disagree with. That's how boring these Amazon reviews were. These were pretty boring reviews other than just discussion. And I will say, speaking of, though, that album, It's Time to Bleed, their second album, is their album I'm the least familiar with. But if there's somebody out there who likes the sort of more nu metal and maybe softer direction than like the Cleansing, but thinks the Cleansing is too hardcore, their second album is like a perfect Goldilocks situation. It's kind of the best of both of those albums.
Okay. It's interesting that this reviewer says that they can listen to this whole album front to back, because here's the thing. This album is very tonally consistent. Like, it has a tone. If you like one song of this album, hell, if you like 1 minute of this album, you're probably going to like the rest of it, because it delivers on what it is all the way through. Like, it is one of the most unified sounding albums I've ever heard, and that is both good and bad, I think.
No, totally. Like, there's no like skip tracks on this, but that can also be a good or bad thing. Like, if you don't like, 1 minute of this album, you're gonna fucking hate the rest of the album. I'm just gonna be honest with you. Like, that's a really good way to put it.
And the inverse of it too. If you like really vibe with a song on here, if you put this on, you're like, yeah, well, guess what? The whole album sounds like that.
Yeah, so yeah, it is very much in that way. It is a love it or hate it kind of album, like straight up. And also, the Cleansing is very similar to that. Like, it is just aggressive noise throughout. And if you can't stand 2 minutes of it, you're not going to survive the other 40 minutes of it. Like, you're just.
And to be honest, the love it or hate it, that's another nu metal influence shining through.
Yes. Oh my God. And speaking of, I think we were going to get that. Oh, never mind. There's actually a song I want to talk about, the specific thing. But the way that this band got started, Brian, is absolutely hilarious and incredibly elderly millennial. But we'll get to that point when we get to that point. But Brian, you are going to love it. Trust me. It'll make you either groan or laugh or maybe both. It is so funny. It is so fucking funny. And then our final review here is from Wang Band Dang. Wang Bandang? Whatever. Anyways, it's all one word. Wang Bandang gives us 2 stars. And the header of the review says, what a huge letdown. And the body of the review says, I have always loved Suicide Silence's music. No Time to Bleed was epic. It's No Time to Bleed. That's it. This time I have to say this has got to be the worst album they have out. It was overhyped since their last albums were so sick. Really, there's like 3 good songs. And we just talked about how literally this is a unified album. If you like 3 songs, you'll like the other like 9 songs.
Interesting, because like I said, when I was shown earlier Suicide Silence, I hated it so much. I thought it was just really whiny. I thought it was very soft, and that was before the background. The reason I'm able to kind of sink my teeth into this is I think maybe because it's not trying so hard to be heavy. It's more nu metal-y, it's catchier. But why would you be let down by this? Like, if you liked older Suicide Silence,
Yeah, there's really, except for the fact that the Cleansing is just so overbearing with its sound, and that was by design. There's not really that much different, in all honesty, versus the Cleansing and No Time to Bleed versus. I genuinely don't understand how somebody could hate this album and like the other 2.
I mean, I've never heard that album, but I mean, even so, it's like you're still listening to Suicide Silence. It's not like you're listening to like Anal Cunt, Yeah, you're not listening to Sore Throat.
Yeah. And then the last 2 sentences are hilarious. So, my hopes for this album were pretty high, but the Black Crown is just garbage, in my opinion. I can only hope the next album goes back to its roots of epicness and not this new crap. And, what's the opposite of Nostradamus? Nostradamus? Because this dude did not predict that correctly, because
get fucked.
Their next album, which is just their self-titled album, is just straight nu metal. Just no deathcore. It's all nu metal.
Ooh. And that's interesting. I might like that one more then.
Oh, it is. Ooh, it's not good. Honestly, post Mitch Suicide Silence is a pretty bad band. I'm gonna be honest with you. Like, I've only heard that self-titled album, and I heard one single. It was actually on the Devil May Cry 5 soundtrack, the video game, which is interesting. And that song is also really bad. Eddie Hermida is just a really bad fit for Suicide Silence, a terrible fit for that band. I don't know why they chose him, to be honest with you. I just have no idea. He's terrible for the band. And like, it's not like Suicide Silence was like some fucking shitty garage band that couldn't find another vocalist. Like, they were a big fucking band, clearly from the Benefit show. They were like they were going to be the next big metal band when this album came out, and they were riding that high for a little bit, and then fucking Mitch died.
And like as I've said, and I'll probably say again, this is not my favorite like rock vocalizing style, but this guy on this record clearly is a skilled vocalist. He's not like a da type hardcore guy. This is like you'd think they would bother to replace him with someone that, could kind of at least hit some of those notes and those stretches.
And Eddie Hermita, he's an okay like cover vocalist, but once they get out of like the old Mitch stuff, it's all garbage. It is all trash. It is not worth listening to in the least bit. In fact, their first single after Mitch died on their self-titled album became kind of a bit of a metal meme because there's like one clean, and I don't even remember what the actual vocal is, but he goes like like it sounds like he's going tee hee. It's ridiculous. It's just like
no.
And he's screaming before then in like a metal vocalist sound. He goes, it's like that. It's bad. It's so bad. And I don't know why they even included it. Like, seriously, look up, it's called Doris. That's the song. Also a terrible metal song title, by the way. But yeah, during the like not screaming part, she just goes, and I'm not kidding. It sounds exactly like that. It's bad.
He kind of doing like a Patrick Stump thing.
No, I don't think so. I think he was trying to do like a clean style and it just comes out really sounding weird. It just sounds weird.
Well, add this to the list of things I will abuse myself with tonight after we record.
Yeah, Winds of Plague and Doris. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, God. But speaking of abusing ourselves, so let's finally get into the track listing here. So the first song here is Slaves to Substance. And I remember we talked about it a little bit before recording here. I think this is a song clearly about addiction of some kind, but I think it's like an introspective song about like the thoughts that might go through somebody who is going through addiction. I think you made it sound like it was like a song where like the person is like, you're a piece of shit for being an addict. And I don't think that's what that's going for.
Look, you know more about this band than I do, but first things first, don't care about any of the lyrics on this album.
Totally fair. Totally fair.
Not listening to this type of metal with any thought about the lyrics that don't matter to me. But I did read the lyrics because they show up on Spotify as I listened. And yes, I do use Spotify. I know it's bad. And when you're just reading this and you don't know anything about this band, and they don't seem like a band that would do irony, to be honest. The way that those lyrics read on this album are, you're going through what I went through. Get over it, pussy.
Okay, so I feel like, and it's one of those things where I listened to The Cleansing, and there's a pretty similar song on there about, I think, what's quite literally about suicide. And it's got a very similar, like, vocal thing where it's like, don't kill yourself, don't be a coward kind of. It's like very tough love kind of thing. That's what it kind of seems like. But I think it's like, yeah, almost kind of like a Henry Rollins sort of tough love thing, if that makes sense. But I would say a little bit nicer, I'll say that. So I don't think it's criticizing people who have addictions or saying get over it, pussy kind of. I don't quite think it's that level. But if you're not familiar with their other output, it does kind of sound like that. I'm going to be honest with you. It does. I'm just going to be real.
I mean, your explanation makes more sense. But when I read that, I was like, well, that's a shitty thing to say.
Yeah. But that's the thing, though, is that a lot of these lyrics here are like kind of inspirational. Like, especially once we get to later songs, they're like actually kind of inspirational. So to me, it's just like that just doesn't make sense to me that it would be that kind of way.
Yeah, that does make sense. That did stick out to me when I would read these lyrics. I would think like, oh, these are like, it makes sense that they couldn't be a full-on death metal band because all of their lyrics are basically like, you got to get out there and do it for yourself and believe in yourself and I love you.
And that's the thing, though, is that, so I'm just going to get into it right now. I was going to save it for later, but Suicide Silence got started in the hardcore scene. Like, a lot of people don't know that. Like, Chris and Mitch, like, went to hardcore shows specifically, and they would go wearing, like, Korn t-shirts and Slipknot t-shirts, and they would get the shit kicked out of them. In, like, 2001 or whatever. Yeah, if you're wearing if you're in 2001 and you're wearing a Korn and Slipknot t-shirt at a hardcore show in the Inland Empire, so they're from Riverside, California, which is just
going
west of
to see
Los Angeles.
Fucking Ramallah when you're
Korn t-shirt. Yeah, seeing like Bleeding Through or something because they were an Orange County band, so they'd be obviously in the area, and like just getting your ass kicked to like like Bleeding Through songs in your Korn t-shirt.
Guys.
Yeah, they talk about that. Like Chris talks about that on his podcast all the time. Like, yeah, we got the shit kicked out of us wearing fucking Korn t-shirts and stuff. But yeah, so these guys got started in the hardcore scene, and I think they have that sort of hardcore like DIY ethos when it comes to basically everything. So, and I think that kind of shines through on these lyrics. Obviously, not as much as like a New York hardcore band as much, but definitely there.
But no, that is the vibe I got. It's kind of like that NY hardcore thing that's all about unity, and you got to stand up for like what they call posse lyrics. It's a little bit of that.
Exactly, yeah. So, and the next song is OCD, which is kind of similar to that. I mean, this is a song quite literally about Mitch's OCD, which, as somebody with a lot of OCD tendencies, I relate to a lot of the lyrics on this one, I'm going to be honest with you. And this is, I think, the first song on the album with pretty clear nu metal influence. I don't think the first one has
Yes.
as much, but this one has very clear nu metal influence on it.
So this was the first track, I did enjoy, even though I thought the lyrics, they kind of took me aback. But again, I don't care about lyrics in this type of music. I enjoyed it and I was like, okay, easing into it. I would agree with you. When I got 2 tracks in, especially when you hear that rhythm section, when you hear that bass in this, you hear just how groovy it is. You're like, oh, this is like a death metal band doing nu metal.
Yeah.
A lot of groove and a lot of swing on this track.
Yeah, and we'll certainly get into it in later tracks, but there's like actually some pretty solid solos on this album too, especially for the
Yeah.
kind of band that it is.
That was one of the things that stuck out. And actually, I think the first time I noticed it is on the first track, is even though this is like production wise and in terms of its rhythms and things, consummately nu metal in a lot of ways. Not overall, but just in its production and sort of aesthetic. But then there are these kind of shredding guitar solos, which you never heard in classic nu metal.
No, never. In fact,
they really stand out.
In fact, Korn, the very first solo Korn ever did was for the fucking Haze video game soundtrack, and it is a bad, bad solo. It is terrible.
Aw.
And Chris Garza talks all the time about how he was just insanely influenced by Korn and stuff like that. And it's very true. And hilariously enough, Chris Garza actually looks like Monkey if he showered. That's what Chris Garza looks like. That's the best way to describe what Chris Garza looks like. But like Chris Garza is a much better guitarist than Monkey, because Monkey is not a good guitarist. I'm just going to be real here.
The guitars on this, those guitar solos are good. But they do stand out. Like you're not expecting kind of a type guitar solo when you're listening to this type of music, and it really cuts through.
And it's a tight fucking noodly kind of guitar solo too. It's very tight, especially for deathcore, very tight, because deathcore did not do solos. That was not a thing deathcore did either. Although they did them more often than nu metal, but that was definitely not a common thing. And it was all about the breakdown and the chug chugs more than the solos. And then the next song on here is Human Violence, and this is, I think, the first one on here that I just like. The instrumentation on this is so fucking good. Solid solo. Yeah. It's just super fucking good.
I was going to say the same thing. The first 2 tracks I'm listening to, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of figuring out what this album is, getting my feet wet, kind of, Human Violence really comes down where I was kind of caught myself bopping around and going like, this song is really ripping. It sounds really aggressive, which it should with that title. And again, it has kind of that groove and that swing that you'd associate with like Pantera or with Korn, but then it's so fast and it's so kind of frantic sounding at times.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Just a really, really fucking good track here. And like I said, the first one that I really, really grooved to. So I like this one quite a bit. And then the next song on here is You Only Live Once, otherwise known as YOLO. Now, this is the big song from Suicide Silence. This is a huge
I had a feeling.
Song. This song, no joke, is on YouTube and Spotify, up until very recently on Spotify. But on YouTube, it is the most viewed deathcore song of all time on YouTube. And up until very recently, it was the most streamed deathcore song on Spotify as well. It just I was double checking it. It just very recently got beaten by that one Lorna Shore song that became really popular.
I'm sure lots of guys have this on their gym playlist.
No, I mean, and I think I put it in the note here, but like this is like the anthem for the band, and it kind of is their masterpiece, if I'm being honest with you. Like this is kind of the band's masterpiece, if you ask me.
Listening to this again, I was thinking like, you don't hear, at least I'm not used to hearing anything with a death metal influence with these kinds of lyrics. This is like hearing lyrics by like H2O or something like that. Something this unabashedly positive and this just kind of like on its face sincere. I was really like, whoa, huh?
Yeah, so it starts with push your care, push your burdens aside, erase everything inside and leave just one thing on your mind. You only live once, so just go fucking nuts. And that is the Suicide Silence ethos right there. I mean, it really is. I mean, the whole ethos of Mitch's life. Like, seriously.
These lyrics, I'm going to be honest, they did make me laugh listening to them, but also I appreciate what they are. I'm glad that they exist. This is almost the opposite of what I listen to like heavy music and hardcore for, to be honest.
But it is amazing though, like the dichotomy between how like heavy the song is for the subject matter of the vocals is genuinely wild. Like you just don't hear that in metal. You really don't.
And I think so musically, I think at this point it's the longest track of the album. It's got more parts than I was expecting, and that's true of a few songs here. They kind of try some different tempos, some different little sections. Everyone gets to show off. This is one of those songs, there's, the bassist gets time to shine, he gets a little moment. Again, there's lots of kind of drum acrobatics. Like it does feel very crafted. which is not something I was expecting from this album before I listened to it.
And, another thing is too, is I remember when the song came out and, just a couple months later, The Motto by Drake came out, which of course had YOLO in it. And I know a lot of people, I saw it in all the comment sections of YouTube and fucking Reddit for a while, but people were so fucking mad that Drake had You Only Live Once as like his fucking song. And I guarantee you, at least like 100 people typed in YOLO and they got this song and they're like, yeah, oh wait, this isn't it. Like that seriously, I bet you that happened. Cause like, I mean, this song's called YOLO and nobody called the Drake song The Motto. They called it YOLO. You only live once. And that was a big motto for both metal and like pop and hip hop people for like 6 months. It's crazy that was like a unified message for both of these fan bases for like 6 months to a year. That's crazy.
It was probably a formative moment for XXXTentacion when both of those songs came out at the same time.
It is genuinely crazy that both of those songs were really fucking big and they came out within 6 months of each other. It's genuinely, I don't know if impressive, it's weird. I'll just say that. Very, very strange. Two acts that couldn't sound more not alike.
Maybe Drake, he is known for ripping off other artists. Maybe he ripped off Suicide Silence.
I wouldn't be surprised if I'm being honest with you, because this was a big song when it came out. This was the metal song for a long time. If you like knew a normie who was like, oh, I really got into metal recently, like this was the song that they listened to. I'm not joking.
Yeah. I enjoyed this album, but it did give me Coworker rock vibes at times.
Suicide Silence were a really big Coworker core band, like a metal Coworker core band. I'll just say
that. And I think that's the thing is it's pretty heavy. Like it is pretty heavy. I know when we talk about heavy music or whatever, it's cool to be a snob and talk about how this band isn't nice. But for like a popular band, this is pretty heavy. This is like noticeably derived from death metal, and it got pretty popular. They found a way to take all of these different elements and make them pretty accessible. And that's kind of the things that I do like about this album. I think it's the way that they were able to kind of sneak all of these influences in and probably show them to a lot of people who wouldn't have listened to them. Like, I bet there's a lot of people that listen to this album or listen to Suicide Silence in general who wouldn't put on a more obviously death metal or more obviously nu metal band. But Suicide Silence kind of filtered into this kind of, at the time, modern, I don't know, post-hardcore kind of metalcore thing. And it's almost like they sneak these sounds in to this wider base of people.
Yeah. And, on top of it, too, I can tell you Suicide Silence also had a very, very prominent female fan base. Like, and that's obviously a rare thing in metal altogether outside of like very specific metal genres, but Suicide Silence had a lot of female fans.
My memory when that fucking kid in high school asked me, because I said I liked grindcore, and he showed me Suicide Silence, and I was like, oh, the singer, he's like kind of a pretty boy.
He was absolutely like a lot of scene girls had a crush on him. He's also tall. He was also very tall, so that helped.
You just don't see that often in like extreme metal, in hardcore. You just don't.
No, you really don't. Like, honestly, all those guys, they look like the kind of guys you would see in like a warehouse who wear, shoes for crews. They would like non-slip shoes, and they wear like cargo shorts only.
Even the handsome guys in that scene, like, okay, let's, for example, like Henry Rollins, very handsome man. I wouldn't call him a pretty boy in the way I remember this dude being back in the day.
No, like, honestly, if this guy had lived long enough, he probably would have been in like Revolver, not wearing a shirt at some point.
Like an underwear model, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. He was a very popular individual with the scene girls, I'll just say that. And that was also why I didn't like them at first, to be honest with you, because I'm like, oh, this band the girls like, because I was like 15 and I was stupid.
And to be honest, that's their whole sound. That makes sense. They're kind of, they're groovy. You can kind of, even though it's death metal influence, there is like this strong sense of melody. They're catchy. You can understand his lyrics most of the time, which is not true of most of this genre that I have seen. So that's probably a big draw for a wider audience,
No, absolutely, yeah. Deathcore, they do a lot of bree vocals.
Yeah.
As Job for a Cowboy popularized in deathcore. But
I hate that shit.
Honestly, their Doom EP, I love their Doom EP. That's such a fucking good EP. I'm going to be honest with you. Although you actually might like Job for a Cowboy now because they're just a straight up like progressive death metal band now. So
Interesting.
and they've been
Interesting.
they've been death metal since their Doom EP, but now they're just straight up like progressive death metal. It's interesting.
Yeah, that was another band who, like, kind of emo kids I went to high school with thought that I was talking about Job for a Cowboy and Suicide Silence when I said grindcore. And it's like, no, where did you get that? That's a different thing. And I'm not even saying that like oh, it's poser music. I'm saying like this is distinctly not the same thing as like Anal Cunt and Napalm Death.
No, God. But like I said, though, if you're interested, like I said, the new Job for a Cowboy is like progressive death metal. So you might be interested in that. I'll just say.
That's such an awful band name. Suicide Silence is also bad, but it fits the band. Like it is perfect for them.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's a good name in that sense, even though I think it's stupid, is good. You know, it's memorable. It describes their sound, describes their, Job for a Cowboy. It's like, what am I listening to? Ween?
Well, speaking of jobs, the next song here is very much a Monday going back to work anthem. So fuck everything. And this is a good album because I think it's almost like a vocal exercise for Mitch here. Like he is going pretty good on this one. Like he basically just screams fuck everything. And like I said, it almost sounds like a vocal warm up for Mitch. So I kind of like that.
So another track that I really like, I think that this is, up to this point, I would say the only track that I actively was like, oh yeah, was Human Violence, although that does improve later on. With Fuck Everything, this has got some groove with the rhythm section in this song is really interesting. The bass is doing a lot. I think this is the first time it really hit me and I was like, oh, these guys listened to LD50 and they probably listened to Iowa.
Oh, yes, 100%. Yeah, they were big Mudvayne fans. I mean, of course, they had Chad Gray on the fucking Memorial show, but still, yeah, definitely some Mudvayne influence, obvious Slipknot and Korn influence, just a lot of specific nu metal influence. And then, speaking of, that goes perfectly into the next actual song here because there's an interlude, nothing much to say on that one. But the next song here is also the longest song in the album, Witness the Addiction. Now, this one is, I would say, would have been probably inarguably Mitch's favorite song because it actually has Jonathan Davis from Korn on vocals.
Oh,
and
that is him. I thought he was just doing his best. I'm glad you said that because I almost said like, wow, he's doing such a good Jonathan Davis impression like a schmuck.
No, that actually is Jonathan Davis on the vocals. And like, Jonathan Davis in general, like he's obviously got a very distinct, he's got like a very workman style vocal style and almost everything, but like his features, he's not always my favorite, and I'll be honest with you, but he's doing a great fucking job on this song. He's putting his A game in it. I like his vocals a lot. Knowing
that that's him, that's interesting because like this song really works with those vocals. He has a very distinct voice, and I don't think you can feature. Let's just put it this way: not every band, not even every metal band, could have Jonathan come on and have it work. But this song really works. It's very flattering to his voice.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Honestly, I would say this is, I think, maybe my second or third favorite song in the album, even though it is. Suicide Silence did not really do long songs. They actually kind of had like hardcore length songs on like The Cleansing. Like two of the biggest songs of that album are like 2.5 minutes long. So to have a 5.5 minute fucking Suicide Silence song sounds a little exhausting, but I think they do a pretty good job on this one. I think this is easily my second or third favorite song in the album.
I think like this stretch here, like Fuck Everything, Witness the Addiction, Cross-Eyed, that's like, I'm going to be honest, like I think for me, I could probably take this album as an EP, but there's this middle section here where it's like, oh, this band is really firing on all cylinders. It seems like they've figured out what the album is. They've married all these songs perfectly. And those are the tracks where I think the groove is really set in. The idea of like death metal you can dance to, which is basically what this is to me, is really interesting and probably the most fun thing about this record. And I think that's really on full display on like this stretch of 3 tracks or so.
Absolutely. And then speaking of, so next one's Cross-Eyed Catastrophe. Now, we both agreed this is our favorite song on the album. Yeah, just instrumentally, it's fantastic. It features Alexia Rodriguez of the band I Set to Kill, and I love her backing vocals on this. It adds a lot to the song itself. This is a really fucking good song.
It's very kind of alien sounding, kind of a creepy chorus sound, a little unsettling. The instrumentals here, I mean, again, it's still very groovy, but this song, there's a real kind of ominousness to this. I don't know. There's tension throughout the album, but I think it's really, you feel it here. The bass strings sound like they're about to snap off. And lyrically, actually, I like these lyrics. As I said, I don't really care about lyrics in this type of band, and there were a lot of lyrics here that I thought were kind of silly. I like the lyrics. I think these are some nasty statement of purpose lyrics. It's kind of like, fuck you, this is what we're doing thing. Like I see why this resonated for a lot of people of a certain age.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Yeah, definitely one of the less earnest the less earnest lyrics on here. I'll just
Yeah.
say that. Not as much motivational stuff on this one.
Yeah, which might be thinking about it now. That might even be part of why I like it so much more than the rest of the album because it's like that is more like the vibe I'm looking for when I listen to aggressive music.
No, totally. And I totally get that. Like, at least for me, I don't mind the motivational stuff and the sort of statement of purpose lyrics, but I'll be honest, they're not always the ones I look out for. Like, I
Oh
don't really
yeah,
care
just
about lyrics and metal for the most part.
to be clear, that's not a criticism. It's just like that's what I relate to more. But
No,
it's
it
not
just
that
is what
it's
it is.
bad when lyrics aren't like that or anything.
No, exactly. And then the next song on here is Smashed, and this is the heaviest song because it's actually got
It
a
is.
death metal singer on it, from Suffocation, Frank Mullen.
Oh,
Not related to Nick Mullen. Not related to Nick Mullen from Cumtown. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's got
Nick
Frank.
Mullen, guest vocalist Nick Mullen.
Yeah. Yeah, this has the vocalist of Suffocation on here, and he does a fucking phenomenal job on this one too. He's a great guest vocalist.
This is another one of my favorite songs on the album. I think because it is like hardcore tempo, which most of this album is not. And I mean like this is like NY hardcore almost. It's very fast, it's very abrasive. And then it culminates in a Dimebag Darrell style solo, which is nice.
Yeah, I know we keep
I
talking about the solos, but the solos on this are fucking really good. Like straight up, they
well,
are good solos.
I just think it's important to highlight because people don't normally associate this type of metal with solos, but they really are highlights in this album. They really stand out probably because we aren't expecting them when we listen to this type of like metal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, just like new metal. Like if you already hear a new metal solo, you'd be like, oh shit,
You'd have
okay.
to double take. Oh, okay, yeah, exactly.
And then the penultimate song is the only thing that sets us apart. And this one actually has like some prog metal parts in it.
Yeah.
Like very cynic. I described it as very cynic ass
Yep.
instrumentals. Like it was
Yep.
like it kind of blew me away like hearing it like again for the first time. And I'm like, wait, is this cynic? Like what the fuck?
Yeah, I also got prog metal vibes from that. That refrain that comes in throughout, very cool, creepy sounding. Kind of gave me like self-titled Slipknot vibes for just a second. It's got kind of an evil carnival type music. Unfortunately, it doesn't last very long.
No, it doesn't.
It's a very cool sound. I'd love to hear them try to expand on it.
And interestingly enough, the lyrics, I know we haven't talked about the lyrics in a while because mostly who the fuck cares, but the lyrics are anti-racist. So that's interesting to hear because you don't really hear that in metal very often.
Especially from like death metal. It's not even that those are racist bands. It's just like I was reading the lyrics today while I listened and I was like, oh yeah, another way I guess that the lyrics kind of remind me of like kind of posse hardcore.
Yeah, no, totally. I appreciate hearing that because I mean, like half of Suicide Silence are like Latino Hispanic, the other are white. So it's not like there's not like, a racial dynamic here with it, but like you don't really hear like anti-racist metal songs because let's be honest, a lot of metal is very racist. That's just the reality. A lot of it is very, very racist. A lot of metal fans especially are super racist. The online ones are very racist.
But I'll even be more, you're right, I agree, but I'll even be more generous. Sometimes I think bands might even be thinking, well, that's not really what we do. It doesn't fit in aesthetically. But no, when I was reading the lyrics and I was like, oh yeah, this is like an anthemic, like anti-racist, like pro-solidarity, like explicit. It is like a hardcore song. And yeah, I liked that. Even though I said didn't like all the posse lyrics. In this instance, I was charmed to see that. And I was like, all right. And I do think musically, again, like this stretch of the album for me is when it's really firing on all cylinders. I like that creepy little refrain. And like the other tracks that I liked, I think it's really tight. This probably is the only political song on the album, right?
Well, that leads us into our final song here, Cancerous Skies. And the lyrics of this one are very similar to Eden's Demise from Earth Crisis. Very Eden's Demise. A lot of similarities there. So it is like it's an environmental song. It's very clearly what the song's about, environmental degradation.
So just a couple quick thoughts on that. So I love the lead guitar on this. Again, there's some kind of show off kind of guitar kind of wank things, but they sound really cool. They sound really aggressive and kind of like ominous. This is a cool song, but for the final track on the album, I felt like it was a little underwhelming. Like I was kind of expecting this really big ending because this whole album is so heavy and it's so driving and pummeling. And this track is good, but it kind of just sounds like the tracks that preceded it.
Agreed.
And I guess I was expecting some sort of bombast or something for them to get really heavy on the last track. So, I was a little like, that's a strange way to end your record.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, when you're talking about Eden's Demise, like that definitely ends in a much better way. And like I said, they're very similar
Very
songs.
theatrical. Yeah.
Exactly. But yes, so that is the track listing here, and I totally forgot to mention it. I just remembered it now, but I want to tell you the way that Suicide Silence got started, Brian, because you're gonna fucking love
Please.
this. So they started in like I want to say 2002, 2003. So that's like infant new like deathcore. Like
Yeah.
deathcore. I mean, technically, I mean, you're talking about Earth Crisis. A lot of people described their first couple LPs as deathcore because I remember we mentioned that on the
Well,
Earth Crisis episode, but we obviously don't see it that way.
but it's not. It's not.
But actual like deathcore as like a solidified genre pretty much got started with Suicide Silence in like 2003, 2004. And their first EP, I don't think has an official name, but it is oftentimes called in the scene the Family Guy EP because, Brian, I'm not joking, it's 4 songs. 2 of them later ended up on The Cleansing, and I think the other 2 never actually got made into actual songs on their later releases. But the songs start with audio clips from Family Guy before the songs.
Awesome. Based. I love it.
It is
I guess
elderly
I'm listening
millennial.
to this tonight too.
Yeah, they're gonna listen to the Family Guy EP. Yeah, and
Like, why did they do that?
they got started on MySpace. It was the mid to early 2000s. That's just
They're being pretty mimetic.
they're being epic. They're being
Yeah, they're getting epic with it. Do you think they regretted that like a few years later? Or do you think they were like, yeah, that was awesome. It's just too bad we couldn't legally put it out?
I'm guessing Mitch on the tour bus was probably quoting Family Guy a lot, would be my guess.
Oh man, I'm looking at the cover. They've got the evil monkey that was in Chris's closet.
It's great.
Badass.
It's great,
There's
isn't
Todd
it?
Tucker.
I'm so glad I didn't tell you this in the beginning because you've been like, Taylor, I don't want to talk about this.
This is such a bad choice.
To be fair,
I'm
they
so
were
glad
like
they did this.
they were like
Yeah,
18 years old. They were
Yeah.
like they recorded
I
for
did
like
shit like-
$100.
Yeah, if I had made an album when I was 18, it would have been the most embarrassing shit in the world.
Oh God, Jesus!
It's cool because it is elderly millennial because it's like vintage Family Guy. Like they have the Kool-Aid Man on there.
Yeah, it's fucking it's so good, dude. It is. And I will say though, especially for a band that is just trying to get started, I think they said they recorded it for like $500 or something. It's very, very lo-fi. But like you hear it, and especially the 2 songs in the album, or the 2 songs in the EP that later ended up on The Cleansing, which was I think Bludgeoned to Death and Destruction of a Statue, I think were the 2 songs. And Bludgeoned to Death, you can hear that they have formulated the idea of what that song is going to be. That's still my favorite Suicide Silence song. That's a fucking phenomenal song. Like it is, Brian, I know you are gonna hate hearing this, but it is the closest Suicide Silence got to like grindcore. It is normie grindcore. It is.
I will listen to this. I will see.
It is, like I said, the closest that normies would ever get to grindcore. I'll just say that. So you might fuck with that, and just the idea that like, oh, a band that like normies and like girls like listen to this and vibe to it. Like you might be surprised. You might be surprised.
Okay.
I'll say that.
I will check. You have piqued my interest.
Hell yeah, dude. All right. And, we were waiting for our final meeting to come up here, and I decided I wanted to give Brian a bit of a history lesson on the very worst, and to be fair, some of the best that deathcore had to offer. And Brian, what were some of your opinions?
I gotta say, still not my favorite genre. Listening to some of that, and I haven't listened to all of it yet, but skimming through the many links that Taylor sent me, I've gotta say, The Black Crown is by far one of the better deathcore albums that I have experienced. This is, in the context of this genre, seems to be kind of a masterpiece. And I mean that sincerely.
Yeah, so I sent Brian Bludgeon to Death, which is my favorite Suicide Silence song. I sent him...
I enjoyed it. That had some cool production, it's nasty sounding.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, once again, for a band that, like, teenage girls loved, it's heavy as shit. Like, it's...
Yeah.
And then I sent him Impaler by Winds of Plague, a band that I mentioned earlier on the episode as a terrible band, and my God, that is such a bad song. It's so bad.
I have not listened to Winds of Plague yet. I'm waiting till I'm laying down in bed with my chamomile tea. The way that classical music is meant to be enjoyed.
It's genuinely incredible. It is, to me, like, okay, obviously this band is a lot better, but it reminds me a lot of when I first listened to Sleep Token, because I'm like, what are all these influences? They make no sense. They make no sense.
I still today, I cannot make heads or tails of Sleep Token.
They're a weird band. We're going to talk about an album later on in the series that is actually very good friends with Sleep Token, but a band that's far better than Sleep Token. And honestly, the people that I've mostly heard talk about Sleep Token, I'm going to be honest, are women. And I am beyond my misogynist era. I am not in my misogynist era. I want that to be very clear. But I only hear women talk about how much they love Sleep Token, and I just don't get it. I really don't understand the appeal. It sounds honestly like AI.
When I heard of Sleep Token, so Taylor, you know, and listeners will probably know too, the last several years I listened to like a lot of R&B and soul music, more than I do rock music. I still listen to a lot of like hardcore and, you know, death rock and whatever, but I listen to a lot of R&B, and I was kept seeing like just write-ups describe this band Sleep Token as a mix of black metal and R&B. And I checked him out and I was like, this doesn't sound like either of those things.
It really doesn't. And like
but I don't know what it is.
The person who I think their stage name is Vessel, they've been outed since then, and they're just like a prog metal nerd. And that sounds to me like a prog metal guy who's just like, oh, I want to make a prog thing that's still fucking commercially viable. And that's what he made, but he added AI to it to finish up the vocal arrangements. Like, it's just not good. I don't understand the appeal of it at all.
You know, what it reminds me of is kind of like Imagine Dragons, where it sounds very distinct. Yep. It sounds like nothing else. You immediately know what it is, but also it's so bland.
You know who described it that way too, Brian? Anthony Fantano described it as metal version of fucking Imagine Dragons.
You know, I refused to watch that guy's reviews, and I was like, fuck that guy. He's all right.
Yeah, he's fine. Honestly, I agree with most of his opinions, although he did give My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy a 6 out of 10. So, I mean...
I disagree with him. You know, I both agree and disagree with him pretty regularly, but he's all right. I enjoy listening to his takes, even when I disagree with him. I think he has interesting things to say.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, this is definitely not an Anthony Fantano hate podcast. We're an Anthony Fantano meh podcast. I'll say.
Yeah. Anthony Fantano, okay.
Yeah. And then the last song I sent you was not their most recent song, but the song that they did right after Mitch died. And it's oftentimes just known as the Tee-Hee song. And it's...
Yeah. Why is he doing that? That's not what you listen to deathcore for. Why is he going Tee-Hee? I just don't understand.
They also did, and I was telling you they did a song for the Devil May Cry 5 soundtrack, and I just listened to it as we were waiting for the meeting to come up, and it is mixed so horrendously. It honestly sounds like a fucking 15-year-old did. And once again, this was, you know, Suicide Silence is still a big, not like a gigantic band, but they're still like a mainstay metal band. And, you know, Capcom are a big game studio, and they made that pile of shit together. It's baffling. Baffling how bad it is.
It's kind of shocking that Capcom would even accept something like that.
Yeah, it is bizarre. I mean, to be fair, Devil May Cry 5 Devil May Cry 5 is a great game. A lot of people hated DMC Devil May Cry. I actually liked it quite a bit, but I can understand why people hated it. But that game had a very, very aggressively edgy art style, and I'm surprised they didn't put Suicide Silence in that one. That would have made a bit more sense, to be honest with you. But they decided to put it in the Devil May Cry game that everybody agrees was like the return to form. I think that's very interesting. And Suicide Silence, we're not very much in the return to form there. I'll just say that. We're not that in that song. Oh, geez. But yeah, so that is our album review. Brian, do we have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables?
So, well, as far as my own thoughts on the album, listen to the first couple of tracks. If you like them, you'll love the whole album. If you don't like them, you probably won't like the rest of the album. What I kind of want to sum everything up with is, so we are talking specifically about the nu metal revival, as Taylor said in the beginning. What's interesting to me about this album is that this comes out fresh off of nu metal as a cultural force, right? And it's like revived. So you've got this band who at the time is like a pretty big band in metal. They're not really more extreme than nu metal, but they have kind of, on the surface, maybe a different aesthetic, you know, maybe at a glance they're a little more death metal-y. And for them to really consummately incorporate so many elements, vocally, rhythmically, the guitar tones, and not least of all lyrically, from bands like Korn and Mudvayne and Slipknot, I think, is pretty interesting because, as you said, Taylor, there weren't really any young bands doing that at this time yet. No other ones, not that I know of. And in the years since, you know, through the 2010s and into the 2020s, we've kind of watched this reappraisal of nu metal bubble up to the point that by the time you get to the next decade, into the 2020s, you've got all kinds of artists and kind of weird artists and very respected artists, like pretty openly talking about Limp Bizkit and Deftones and Crazy Town. Everyone from like Kanye West to, again, like The Weeknd, a huge nu metal fan.
Little Uzi Vert too, obviously.
Little Uzi Vert, you know, Takeshi X9, and into pop and into, you know, you've got bands. I'm sure that there's hardcore bands, like respected young hardcore bands that probably cape for Korn now.
I know Knocked Loose have. I know Knocked Loose have talked about nu metal.
I mean, it's just interesting how the genre went from being this huge force to being a laughing stock to in a few years now becoming kind of one of the elder statesmen of rock. Like, I feel like in pop punk and emo, their moment lasted longer in the mainstream. But in terms of actual influence, in terms of actual net growth in the decades since, I think that looking backwards, nu metal has kind of got a lot more people interested in it than fucking mall punk does.
No, I would totally agree with that. Yeah, so you pretty much hit the nail on the head of why I wanted to talk about this. Because yeah, when this album came out, nu metal was very much, I would say, in the nadir of its like cultural popularity. And this band and this album definitely helped cement it as a driving force in a lot of popular like rap, rock, and other genres to really incorporate those elements of nu metal into it. And we're definitely going to get into a lot more albums of that in this series, but this is obviously the first one to talk about because it was the first album to do that, I would say pretty inarguably. And just in general, I think this is a very good album. I still think it's the weakest of Suicide Silence's Mitch albums, but it's still very good. If you like The Cleansing, if you like No Time to Bleed, you'll probably like this album. Honestly, there were very few negative reviews on Amazon for this, and I think that's telling in a lot of ways because like the people that don't like this, we already know what their opinions are going to be, but if you like one song, you're going to like basically all the songs. There's really to have the idea that like, oh, there's 2 or 3 good songs and the rest of the album sucks. It's like actually a pretty contrarian opinion to have, if you ask me. Like you're trying to be like contrarian there almost.
I just can't understand why. Like, if you like a song on this album, like you actively like, oh yeah, you'll probably like the rest of it. So for me, because there are things I enjoy about this album, but it's not like my favorite style. That's I would say like, oh, there's for me, there's probably a good EP in here where I would pluck out the best half of the album if I was going to listen to it. But every song on the album is of that quality. Every song on the album sounds like that. So I think really that's my best litmus test is like, especially if you like nu metal and maybe you haven't heard much after like the early 2000s and you think there's nothing coming out, check out the first couple of tracks on The Black Crown. Because if you like them, and you might, because they chug along like some classic nu metal, you'll probably like the rest of the album.
Absolutely. And before we get to our pluggables, I did want to mention I watched the Mitch Lucker documentary that the band and his family made in remembrance of Mitch. I think it was released maybe a year or two after he died. And there's one quote that his mom says that his parents seemed like genuinely really nice, like very nice, supportive parents. So I'm just going to say, honestly, the documentary it honestly almost made me break into tears a little bit. It's a very sweet little documentary that they made. But his mom said a quote that's really interesting. So he was born in 1984 sometime, and his mom said like he came into this world screaming, and he left the world in that way. That's kind of his legacy. And I thought that was very beautiful. I thought
that's very sweet.
So yeah, honestly, if you love this band and you haven't seen the documentary, definitely watch it. It's very good. It's free on YouTube. You might as well. It's got some good home footage of Mitch on it and stuff like that, and some good some very good like early live performances and stuff like that. So just good stuff. Good stuff for sure. All right, so yeah, that is our review here. So let's get into our pluggables. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com, and as well, please follow and subscribe and follow us on both our Spotify and our YouTube channel, where we are uploading every episode of the podcast simultaneously. And as well, as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. They're getting money and donors every day, but they need obviously quite a bit more to make episode 2 and beyond. And of course, our good friends Scott, Sean, and Robert, we love them. We want to see them succeed. So please donate to this wonderful campaign. And if you comment on our YouTube channel, send us an email, something saying that you donated to the Lucifer and the Father campaign because of our show, we will match up to a reasonable amount that donation to our good friends.
Yeah, I just want to second all of that. Please help out Sean, Scott, and Robert, because, I mean, if you've seen the first pilot for Lucifer and the Father, it's very fun. It's very ambitious. They give some great performances. Scott especially really gets to chew the scenery. He gets to play a bad guy, and you can tell he's really relishing it, I think, even though he might deny that if you asked him. And I want to see them get to make more of it. They've been great friends to the show, and they are, they're in an industry where it's hard to do your own thing and make a living. What's more, again, please follow us at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and the Millennials Are Old Facebook page on, of course, Facebook. Please send me any cringe you see, especially if you feel like it denotes something about a particular generation, especially millennial cringe. But, I know there's no shortage of it on the internet.
That there is fucking not. And like I said, unfortunately, we will talk about maybe the single most powerful cringe millennial of all time, depending on how this election goes. I feel like we're going to have like a 20-part series on JD Vance. I feel like there's going to be a lot to talk about with him.
We might have to do like just turn the generational cringe segment into the JD Vance, turn it into Vance Watch.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ. I really hope Trump doesn't win the election because I don't want to talk about JD Vance. That's the one thing I don't. Well, actually, so the reason I don't want to talk about JD Vance, or I don't want to talk about, or I don't want Trump to win, I should say, to clarify, is because I want the Swimmer remake with Trump, and as well, I don't want to talk about JD Vance. I want two of those things at once because the Trump Swimmer remake is going to be a lot funnier, if you ask me.
Well, and it writes itself because Trump has so many great quotes and moments. Thing is, with Biden, I think we could still make it funny, but we'll have to work on it. Whereas if it's Trump, like we have like a bevy of amazing Trump moments and quotes to reference.
But yeah, so that is the episode. So speaking of suicide silence, I'm not going to commit suicide, but I am going to be silent in a little bit because I'm going to go to sleep.
Well, I'm going to be one thing that no millennial ever has been, silent, and I am going to be something that most millennials are or should be, suicidally sleepy.
Yeah. Oh, God. Have a good night, everybody. And speaking of, once again, rest in peace, Mitch Lucker. You clearly made better music than Eddie. Holy shit. I mean, we might have to cover as a cringe millennial segment just the later suicide silence stuff because it is so bad.
You know, I noticed that you said a lot of names, most of which I didn't recognize, and you said the less said about them, the better. Maybe we should do, you know, occasionally a cringe deathcore millennial segment.
Well,
because I don't know about any of these guys.
You don't know? You don't know about Tim Lambesis?
Probably not.
Oh, he was in As I Lay Dying, and he went to prison
because that tried to order a hitman on his wife.
Yep, that was Tim Lambesis.
Aren't they kind of a Christian band too?
No, they're an atheist band. He decided to renounce Christianity when he went to prison. He did the opposite of what most people do.
He did the opposite of what you're supposed to do. Yeah. He's like, damn it. He got in there and his lawyer was like, no, you're supposed to find Christ. He was like, what? No.
Yeah, and Austin Carlisle, he was the original vocalist for, oh God, what was that crap? The original crabcore band. Oh, Attack Attack. He was the original vocalist for Attack Attack. And then he later became the vocalist for Of Mice and Men, and he had to quit because a bunch of women came out with sexual assault allegations against him. So
in that genre? Crazy.
I know, right? What the fuck? And God, there was another one. The less said, the better. I'm gonna look this up real quick, and then we're gonna let go here. But because there were a lot of them that shouldn't have been talked about. Yeah, let's see here. Well, Danny Warsnop, just because he sucks. He's just a lame guy who sucks shit. And I said Tim Lambesis. Eddie Hermida, I mean, we'll talk about him, but God, I hate that guy. He's just so bad. And then, Randy Bly, you only live once. And there was a certain fan in Czechoslovakia who only did live once at a Lamb of God show. Okay, that was terrible. I'm not going to... To be fair, that was not Randy's fault. Legally speaking, that was not Randy's fault, but I had to mention that one. So, and I don't know, Brian, you know what I'm talking about with that, though, right?
I think so.
There was a show in Czechoslovakia where a fan stage dived and he died, and Randy allegedly pushed him off stage, and there was a big trial in Czechoslovakia, and he was acquitted. But he got extradited. You would think that
in Czechoslovakia you would get in more trouble than in the U.S.
Czech Republic, not Czechoslovakia. I don't want all the Czech people getting mad at me. But it was in Prague specifically, and he shoved some guy off the stage, and he died. But at the same time, I mean, that's just a metal show.
Fucking killed a guy. Yeah, I mean, he kind of killed a guy.
Yeah.
A little. That's manslaughter. I mean,
he was acquitted of manslaughter. So legally speaking, he could sue us if we say he killed somebody. He could sue us for saying that. No,
he allegedly pushed a guy off of the stage, which led him to allegedly die.
Yeah, that happened in the Czech Republic, and they extradited him. It was a big fucking deal when that shit happened. So.
I mean, and then I'm sure there were a ton of guys in there that was like, hey man, that's what metal's all about. That's fucking rock and roll. He was doing the ultimate form of crowd killing.
Yeah, he literally crowd
killing.
Well, speaking of crowd killing, I'm going to crowd kill my bed tonight. So have a good night, everybody. I'm going to sleep.
Good night, everyone.